recess. We will rejoin testimony and the court proceedings as soon as they start up again in a couple of minutes. But first, let's check in with our legal panel. Judge Alex Ferrer is host of the syndicated television program Judge Alex, and defense attorney Anahita Sedaghatfar is with us as well. It's good to see you both. Judge Alex, let me start with you. Trayvon's mother on the stand earlier today, and everybody knew what she was going to say. Everybody knew that she was going to identify that voice, that screaming and crying as her son. But how do you think it played with the jury?
Well, I mean,
cross-examine her, Anahita, and we played a little bit at the top of the show, the exchange where Mark O'Mara tried to express his condolences and was told that he wasn't allowed to do that. He had to ask a question of the witness instead, and there were some awkward moments where he was asking the mom, you know, whose voice did you hope you were going to hear? I just wonder if you think that the defense may have overplayed its hand a little bit in their cross-examination of Trayvon Martin's mom.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I've never seen a case where a defense attorney gets up to cross-examine a victim's family member and the other side, the prosecution, objects. I mean, that was just a little bit too much for me. But to touch on the point that the judge just raised, today was supposed to be the best day for the prosecution. I mean, after listening to over a week of the prosecution's case in chief, where they essentially put on the defense case for defendant George Zimmerman, basically setting up his self-defense claim, we thought today was going to be the emotional day, the day they put on the stand Trayvon Martin's mother. I mean, how can you argue that that wouldn't be emotional and impactful? But then what do? They put on this medical examiner, Dr. Bao, who completely was a disaster for the prosecution. He came across completely combative. He wasn't answering questions. And then he brings his own personal notes to the stand and starts reading from the notes. That is a big no-no, especially when you haven't shared those notes with the prosecution. So the defense is going to take those notes, cross-examine him on even more and more inconsistencies. So I think what could have arguably been finally a good day for the prosecution was yet another disaster, and maybe the best day for the defense so far.
Wow. Judge Alex, what do you think about that?
I agree, he was a train wreck.
And Judge Alex, stand by if you would. Court is back in session. We understand that the prosecution is getting ready to rest its case. Let's take a listen.
Officer.
That the prosecution, the state, has rested its case against George Zimmerman. While they're coming back into the courtroom and we wait for that to happen, Anahita, let me go back to you.
Yeah, I was saying I don't think that the defense, quite frankly, needs to do much of anything at this point. I remember way back when the issue was whether or not George Zimmerman was going to testify. There's absolutely no way he needs to testify in a case like this where, again, the state, in their case in chief, where they are supposed to prove every single element of their case beyond a reasonable doubt, actually put the defense case on. And so, quite frankly, I think the defense might call one or two witnesses. There's no way George Zimmerman is going to take the stand. He doesn't need to, and I think it's just going to go to the jury after that.
Judge Alex, you mentioned Anahita Sedaghatfar. Have you ever had a judge grant your motion of acquittal? And if so, or just sort of take us behind the scenes when you're a defense attorney and you're making this request to have the case thrown out against your client. What are you trying to do? What is Mark O'Mara trying to do? And what does he honestly think is going to happen once he's all done?
Well, I think we all expected that O'Mara was going to bring this motion. I don't think the judge is going to grant it because I think this case has gotten too politicized at this point that she's going to send it to the jury. But he's making brilliant arguments. He's making the arguments we as defense attorneys always make. He's saying that the state has utterly failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this is a murder to case, that the state has failed to prove spite, ill will, malice, that they need to prove to make their murder to case. And O'Mara is saying, don't take it from me. Don't take it from George Zimmerman and the statements that he gave repeatedly to the police, which, by the way, were all consistent. Take it from the state's own witnesses, the investigators, the police investigators who testified, both of them, that George Zimmerman did not act with ill will, with spite, with malice. He had no racial motive in his actions that night. And also, let's not forget something that we haven't addressed in a while, and that is that the FBI conducted an independent investigation, and they decided flat out that race was not a factor in George Zimmerman's actions that night. So I think Mark O'Mara is making a very effective argument, but again, because this case has become so high profile, it has become political, race has unfortunately been injected into this trial, I don't think the judge is going to grant the motion. She's going to want this to get sent to the jurors.
We will have to wait and see. Again, the jury not in the courtroom. And Anahita, give us a little bit of a preview. If he does lose this argument and then goes on to have to present a case, what kind of case are we looking at?
I agree. Again, I don't think the judge is going to grant this motion. I think if this case does go to the jury, they likely will get the instruction for manslaughter, which is a lesser included offense here. But the penalty under Florida law for manslaughter is the same as it is for murder too. So that would still be a victory for the prosecution. I think if the jurors follow the law, they will have a complete acquittal here. And also, just to touch on another point you made about the all-female jury, I think, at least from my experience, it's very difficult to say how any juror will ever vote, much less based on gender. So I think here what's really going to matter is those jurors' life experiences. The fact that their mothers may help the prosecution, but again, we have to take into account their political views, their views of the world. And if they follow those instructions that judge is going to give them, they're going to have to acquit George Zimmerman here.
Anahita Sedaghatfar, Judge Alex Ferrer, thanks so much. To my colleague Phil Keating. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. Again, we're streaming this live.